Okay, let's do this. Hi, welcome. It's good to see everyone. What a lovely turnout. We're going to end at 8:15 on time, just so you know. So at Torah study and other formats like this, there's a lot of back and forth, and that's great for that. Tonight I have a lot of material just for the first night, and I have a lot of material that I know we're not going to get to all of it tonight, and that's why we have 3 weeks. So if there are two things I wanted to invite you to consider. Number one is this is not a grief support group. And why I say that is because we have a grief support group every other week on Thursdays, and that's really for us to process what we're going through as mourners and as people who are grieving. That's not to say I'm not sensitive. It's not to say that I won't take a moment to be very sensitive and thoughtful and mindful. But the purpose of tonight is more academic. I may even crack jokes. So it's not meant to offend, it's not meant to hurt, it's not meant to upset, and if I do, it's unintentional. But that's why I wanted to say that our goal tonight is different than what we do every other Thursday in this very room, which is to give people the opportunity to grieve. Number two is I have a lot of material to get through. I need to get through it. When I pause to answer questions, then I'll say, okay, does that make sense? Did you understand? Do you have a question? I don't want it to be too lecture-y. If there's a pressing question on the topic of what we're talking about, which I know is, then please, by all means, I don't want anyone being confused and then waiting 20 minutes until I say, okay, let's go for questions. Okay, so if there's something, a term, a phrase, I'm going to try to explain every single thing that I say to you. And then what I'll likely do is write it up on the board, take a picture of that, and make sure next week or the week after that we get to it. So for example, tonight, we're just looking at sources about what in the Bible refers to the afterlife, what in Jewish tradition teaches us about afterlife. So if someone raises their hand and says, what's the Jewish view of hell? I'm going to say, that's next week. And that means I'm not going to answer it tonight, not because I don't like you, but because for 3 weeks, I want to fill it in. There's a sequence to it. Not my first rodeo, and I want to make sure we stay in almost silos because so for example, tonight, we're not going to talk about the Jewish view of cremation. We're not going to talk about the Jewish view of tattoos or who gets into heaven, who doesn't get into heaven, or even really what heaven is. We're going to do a little bit of that tonight. But mostly we're going to talk about before someone dies and after someone dies, what Judaism has to say about that, what the proper process is, okay? So I'm gonna try to stick to the script, in other words, which is really hard for me to do. Okay, let's go here. Before you look at this, well, look at it, it's up there now. And Stephanie, I'm gonna make one move to the board right now. The rest of the time, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, here we go. Did I do a fantastic job of cleaning this today? You should have seen it was caked with. Nobody in this building knows how to maintain that after you write on a dry erase board, you erase. Otherwise, it sticks. I knew that. Okay, my mother would be so proud of me. Okay. This is a very horrible circle. This is the circle of life. Every single thing that happens to us from the second we're born till the second we die is choreographed. There's a choreography of life cycle rituals. They're not events. You can call them rites of passage, actually. That's fine. Rites of passage, life cycles, everything. Down to the morning prayer that we say in the morning, right? Does anyone know what the first prayer it is that we say in the morning? Anyone? Thank you for my soul. Thank you for giving me another day of life. Modeh ani lefanecha. Thank you, God. Shehechazarta bi nishmati, who has returned my soul to my body. Till the minute we go to sleep, while the Shema isn't necessarily what I would say scripted in the tradition, but most of us say the Shema before we go to sleep is the last ritual. So we wake up, praising God, we go to sleep acknowledging God, and everything in between. There are 100 benedictions every day that are choreographed, scripted for us as Jews to say. And the same is, and that's in a cycle of 6 days. On the 7th day, we remove a bunch of those prayers. Any prayer where we're asking God for something, we remove it. I can see people are cold, so I'm going to go turn the air down so that you're not too cold. You're welcome. Maybe next week when it's up in the 90s, I won't be so nice. I mean, most people know the rules, right? Bring a shawl and a parka, and you'll be fine. Okay. Here is our terrible circle of life. I'm going to put birth and death on the same line. Why? Because the most important thing, if you can walk away with tonight, is each one of us has a soul, a Neshamah. The soul is our essence. You can't point to it. You can't place it. You can call it like, I don't know, your kishkas, like that strong sense that you have. But your soul is given to you by God. It then gets returned to God. Your body is just a vessel. Not just a vessel. It's important that we have it, thank God. But, right? We're not plants. We actually get to have consciousness and all that kind of stuff. That is, our conscience is our soul. So instead of let your conscience be your guide, let your soul be your guide, same idea. And that soul actually spends time in the same place where other souls are, which are the souls of those who are no longer living. When I teach whatever I'm saying tonight, I'm trying to give you a consensus of Jewish legal. Some of it may feel or sound fictional, but traditional ideas about the soul, about death, about life. I'm not giving you a Reform perspective or an Orthodox perspective. I'm giving you a Jewish perspective. And I'm trying to give a consensus perspective because there are literally thousands and thousands of books and passages in Talmud, in our Jewish legal codes, about what to do during these times and how to do it. So you may or may not do these things. And you may or may not believe in these, and some of these may sound like total narishkeit to you. But I just want to put them out there because my job is to teach. So the same place where your soul resided before you were born is where it goes after you die. We're going to talk about that place in a second, and we're going to talk, because I love Venn diagrams, so we're going to talk about this, not tonight. But this we're going to talk about next week, okay? So we're born, if you're a boy, at 8 days, there's a ritual called Brit Milah, which is really fascinating because unless you are alive for 30 days, you don't count. In other words, there's no funeral ritual for a baby who is 30 days or younger. And you want to know why your kids didn't get insurance cards until their 31st day? Jewish law. No one knew that, but we're responsible for that. So Brit Milah, entering into the covenant on 8th day ritual, first rite of passage. Second one, right next to it, these are all for boys, at 30 days is Pidyon Haben, which most Reform Jews and conservative Jews don't know because they don't do it. It's in the Torah that on the 30th day of the firstborn son, who is not a Kohen, I'm not going to explain much, you can go Google this, but I want you to know what it is. If you are I'm a Kohen, so Ethan was my firstborn son, he did not need a Pidyon Haben. If I was a Levite or an Israelite, the other two designations, then I would bring Ethan to, or do you want me to move it? I would bring Ethan to a Kohen, a verified Kohen, give the Kohen 5 shekels to buy my son off, because in the Torah it says I have to give my firstborn son to the priest to work for the temple in Jerusalem. This is thousands of years ago. And Jews never let go of traditions, even if they are literally 2,000 years old, or plus 2,000 years old. So Orthodox Jews do this. I have done one in In 2 months, I'll be 30 years in the rabbinate. I've done 1 in 30 years. Okay. I just throw that up there because it's important to know what the life cycles are. At 12 years and 1 day, a woman becomes a woman. She becomes a bat mitzvah. Okay? At 13 and 1 day, a boy becomes a bar mitzvah. There was no such thing as a party and a service and getting up and an invitation and $20,000 later, up until the Jews moved to this country. No such thing. None. Bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah are rites of passage. They are the equivalent of turning 18 in American law. You become part of the majority. That's all it means, is you are responsible for the mitzvot. Your parents are no longer responsible. There is a traditional prayer. Thank you, God, who houses us with commandments. I'm no longer responsible for my child. It's a parent blessing on the day of their girls' 12-year and 1 day, which means her 12th birthday, and a boy's 13-year and 1 day, his 13th birthday. We've uniformed that to 13 or 7th grade in the Reform and Conservative movement. And the party, the whole rigmarole, the little idol worship thing that we do with the kids, American invented. Okay, yes, I have feelings about this. Confirmation. When you live in Israel, it's likely a kid will show up about a week before. This is very Israeli, very Jewish, with a paper invitation. It's not even an invitation. It's, this is where my bar mitzvah is. It's at this place. Come, bring 10 shekels. Or don't. Like, whatever. Show up, don't show up. It's the first and only time I'm going to be at synagogue. It's my bar mitzvah. I'm reading from the Torah. It's not, I'm not joking. Thank God that there are other movements in Israel now. But when I lived in Israel, I had 2 classmates who had kids who were like kid age. They were like in school, and they were blown away. Like, they'd get a little flyer a couple days before, and their kid could show up to the bar bat mitzvah. Okay, confirmation really is a non-ritual, 100% created to keep kids in religious school, especially girls and boys, because boys were not bar mitzvah in the Reform movement in Germany or in the United States until the 20s or 30s, I think. Girls not at all until the 70s. So it was just a way to keep kids occupied in religious school, keep them coming back, and that went pretty much through 10th grade. So you'll notice if you go into old shuls, including our own, and look at confirmation pictures from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you'll see 80, 90 kids in the confirmation class. It was a big deal. The girls got a white Bible, the boys got a black Bible. That was that. But it's really not a Jewish ritual or rite of passage. It was invented. Okay. The next one isn't until they get married. Marriage has 2 parts. One is the engagement or betrothal, and then a year later, the kiddushin or the chuppah. So a guy would go to, and I'm going to be very blunt about this, in the Talmud, in Jewish legal code, it was a property transaction between a father and a groom. The bride was just the property. And so a year before the actual wedding, a guy would go to a woman's dad's house. They would sign something called tena'im, which was sort of a pre-contract. And a year later, they would get married. And that's why we use a chuppah. It represents the house that the marriage would take place in. Okay, marriage. We also have a whole bunch of stuff in the Talmud about divorces. Gittin, or get. A Jewish divorce decree is called a get. There's a really, really dark humor that they should just put it on the back of the ketubah, flip it over, and you go. You go to a rabbi. I have done 1 in 30 years, and I did it very reluctantly because I don't believe that you should revisit painful stuff. And our movement made it very clear that a civil document, a civil marriage license, and a civil divorce, whatever it's called, decree, are legal. And they use this line in the Talmud, Dina Machot Dina, which means the law of the land is the law which you abide by. And so we don't do gets. I don't have a get. Jamie, you have a get. You have a get. I don't have a get. It doesn't mean that I don't think you should get one. I've just, get it? Okay, but that is a ritual. That is a ritual of release. And there's a huge problem in the Jewish world of women who cannot get gets from their ex-husbands, and they are called agunot, and the children of those women without a get are called mamzerim, or bastards, the bastard child. It's like they're living in the 15th century. And there are, I believe, over 10,000 agunot in the world, in the earth, on the planet. Women who cannot get a release from their jerk husbands. Okay, they can, by the way, the husband can do whatever he wants, but a wife cannot. Why? She's property. So I stay away from the whole thing personally, but if you wanted to get a get, or if you're marrying someone who says, I need you to get a get, you come talk to me, I'll take care of it. Okay. Then there's nothing, really, if you stay married, there's nothing between marriage and death. Any ideas that there are rituals or rite of passages for menopause? No, there are none. There are not. I don't mean that as a joke. That's why we built a mikvah, because there are new rituals for things like menopause, or finishing cancer treatment, or all kinds of things that happen between, like the rabbis literally took a nap. Once you were married, it was pretty much taken care of, right? You were going to produce kids. Now, that's not to say that the parents aren't obligated to 5 things for their children to do. Teach them Torah, teach them a craft, teach them to swim, because remember the Talmud was written near the Tigris and the Euphrates. There was a lot of water. To bring them to the chuppah. I've had a lot of weddings this month, and there's this new thing that's happening that's not going over well, which is a lot of kids do not want any parents walking them down the aisle. Okay, when the camera's not on, I'll explain to you my theory behind this. But when it's really a Gen Z and millennial thing, and it's all connected to the coddling, and it's, yeah. All right, so, but you're supposed to, and I tell the couple, no. Your parents are obligated to walk you down the aisle. It's actually, you're actually not letting them fulfill a very, very, very important mitzvah to bring you to chuppah. By the way, once you're under the chuppah, they don't do anything. Parents don't do anything. They stand there, right? They don't say anything, you know. I mean, God, if a parent said, I want to say something, I'd be like, No. I realize that you've been Purelling your child since they were born, but no. This is about them. They could do it without you. Okay, that is that. So that is the circle of life. I want to go back to the first thing I said. Death, birth, very much in the same realm. So let's go to this realm. There are 2, and then I'll stop for questions. There are 2 parallel universes. Think about it this way. Now you got to open your hearts, open your minds. Forget about science and rationalism and all that good stuff. Let's pretend that we're irrational, but Jewy, right? There are 2 parallel universes happening at the same time and always. The Yenderwelt and Diswelt. This world, where we are right now, I threw in a little Yiddish there for you, and the world to come. This world and the world to come. Olam, world, hazeh, this. Olam, world, haba, the one to come. Not messianic stuff. This is not about the messianic era or when the Mashiach comes, because when the Mashiach comes, we'll get to this in week 3, there's no birth-death scenario in the way that we see it. Okay, so what is this about? Well, what the rabbis wanted to create was 2 things, I think. One was an idea that you have life, this world, and your soul's aspiration in this world and in this life is to do mitzvahs, to heed the commandments, to observe the commandments, to learn, to study, to immerse yourself in the tradition, in Judaism, specifically for the rabbis in Rabbinic Judaism, since there were no more sacrifices. So I think what they wanted to create was 2 things. Number 1 was an idea or an aspiration, but it's not an end. It's not a destination. Okay, the destination in Judaism is everlasting life. not death. Death is just a stop, pause, if you will. In week 3, we're going to talk about Gilgul HaNefesh, the recycling, if you will, or the spinning of souls, and which means reincarnation. We'll talk about that. But if you believe, for example, that you have one life, you're born, you live, you die, that's it, fine. The beauty of Jewish tradition is you can believe that. You're going to see a text tonight that says you can't believe it, or it's a sin to believe it, but you can believe that, and the system goes on without you. You know, it's a beautiful thing. I remember I grew up in San Francisco, and my dad had this philosophy that I'm going to get earthquake insurance, but it's going to have like a $50,000 deductible, because an earthquake doesn't cause $50,000 of damage if you're not built on bedrock. It causes total damage. So my dad figured I have to buy a new house anyway. $50,000 is about right what you would pay for a down payment at that time in San Francisco even then. And he did the math and calculated it and said, in the miraculous event that it's less than $50,000, okay, we'll fix it. But it's going to be a total, right? You plan for these things. You do the math. You do the calculation. But the earthquake's going to happen, and it's going to do what it does. And if you're dumb enough to build a house in San Francisco, you're going to suffer the consequence, or on the San Andreas Fault, or the Hayward Fault, which is the next one that they say will blow up. You know, you're going to build a house in Palos Verdes, and there's going to be a fire, and you're going to overpopulate it. It's going to happen. Nature doesn't have a conscience when it comes to that, because nature is permanent and forever, everlasting. So the universe is bigger than, in the world to come, anything that we could possibly understand or even endeavor to understand as Jews. So I think that's one of the reasons why they created it. And also to give us some sense of comfort that we are going somewhere. Like, this isn't it. Like, you can spend your life suffering, and you're still going to go to a place where there's no suffering. Okay, I can maybe figure that out a little bit to enable me to survive through all the suffering in a terrible life, okay? So those are the two parallel universes. They're happening at the same time. In weeks 2 and 3, we'll enter into this space because Jews also believe that you can communicate with the dead and they can communicate to you. It's all over the Talmud. We'll look at a story, either next week or the third week, I forget, where a woman comes to the next door neighbor in a dream and says, your wife is going to die the next day, send up my lipstick and my comb. Like, pack a bag in the coffin for me, a goodie bag. Literally, it's in the Talmud. The rabbis could just be playing with us, but typically they write that stuff because they want to introduce a concept, and that concept is that we are very much active in this area because it's part of nature. It's part of the natural or supernatural or whatever you want to call it world. It doesn't mean certain things we'll talk about next week and the week after. It doesn't mean that we go and promote it and write books about it, and right? That's not the Jewish thing to do. But we certainly never go to a psychic or a medium or any of that stuff, although we do it all the time, which is why the Torah wrote. Why do you think the Torah writes rules about don't go to soothsayers? Because people do that. And if you take my class, and we'll do a little bit of this about magic and superstition, you'll learn a little bit more about that. Jews do all of that stuff, even though we're not supposed to do it. In fact, I think if the Torah just let it alone, people would, make up their own mind. All right, now let's we're going to do one page real quick. Glimpses from the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is it's a little Gornishy when it comes to afterlife. I sometimes think that the Christians made such a big deal that the rabbis had to catch up and create stuff just to give answers to their people. Because the Christian view is very much focused on the moment of death. We're not. Once you are at the moment of the death, we take it incredibly seriously. There are rituals and all kinds of things that we do. But before that moment, not so much, except the mitzvah system. Next week, we're going to talk about very specific judgment, what judgment looks like. So if you want to see the Albert Brooks Defending Your Life movie again, rewatch that before next week as your homework, because I'm going to talk a little bit about this great movie. Meryl Streep, Albert Brooks, Defending Your Life. Defending Your Life. Great movie. Watch that. Okay. Here's what we learn in Torah. Here's a couple of verses from Genesis 3:22 through 24. And the Lord God said, now that man, this is after they eat the forbidden fruit. Oh, I have it on my screen. I don't have to look back there. And the Lord, look at that. And the Lord God said, now that the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he should stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever? So the Lord God banished him from the garden. This is like no second chance to eat the fruit. Now, by the way, P.S., we're not born with original sin in Judaism, so ignore that whole part of it. That's not us. We just ate from it, and there was no second chance because God was worried that they'd actually eat from the tree again, and they'd get that, all the mysteries, all the stuff that we're talking about now, they would get it and they would live forever. So God banishes him from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. He drove the man, Adam, out and stationed him east of the Garden of Eden, the cherubim and the fiery ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. The rabbis use this image, and I underlined a few things in here. They use this image of the Garden of Eden as a synonym for heaven, for the world to come. We're going to talk about two synonyms in this one verse. So one thing to call heaven, by the way, Shamayim, the heavens, is a thing in Torah. It's in the beginning. God created the heaven and the earth. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heavens and the earth. And here, the Garden of Eden, it's actually in the El Malei Rachamim prayer, the Garden of Eden. It is a symbol or an image of the world to come. And this idea, you remember the pearly gates? Ours aren't so pearly. There's cherubim flying around, and this sword that's of fire guarding it. And so you can't get, you have to be able to avert the sword of fire to get in there. And then in Genesis later on, you guys know this line, dust you are, and dust to you shall return. In one of the creation stories, humanity is created from dust, from the earth. That's why we throw the earth in the grave, right? We're just returning dust to dust, ashes to ashes, right? Adonai natan, v'Adonai lakach. God has given, God has taken away. It's all, again, part of that circle of life. So that's in Genesis 2. In Kehilah, in Ecclesiastes, he says, this is King Solomon probably, in respect of the fate of man, of humanity, and the fate of animals, they have one and the same fate. Both go to the same place, both came from dust, and both return to dust. Again, that's why I put death and birth right there. Every time someone dies, someone's born. Every time someone's born, someone dies. That is a law, capital L, of the universe. And we go to the same places as our animals. So for those of us with furry friends, good news. And if you really like the furry friends, you're going to get like totally licked and slobbered on and the whole thing when you go and pass that fire sword or whatever it is. And then finally, 2 Samuel, we all must die. We are like water. Now we're going to go from dust to water. We are like water that is poured out on the ground and can't be gathered up. Have you ever tried to throw water onto the ground and then collect it? No, it sinks. It goes into the earth. And that is, again, another powerful image of all of these elements of nature. Here we have earth and we have water, and you come from those and you go to those. And so you are all part, I too, am all part of nature. We are made from nature and we go back to nature. Okay? So I think I have one more. Oh, last one from the Bible, from Ezekiel. And you guys have probably heard of this, from Ezekiel 37. This is Ezekiel's one of the prophets. He's having this vision. And when we go on an Israel trip, we actually take you to the place where we think this vision took place. And God said to me, Ezekiel says, "O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel." There's a field that he's looking at with just dry bones. They're not buried bodies. So they've all gone through the natural process, and they're just bones at this point. Our bones, they say, the house of Israel, our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. We are doomed. It's an image of what a lot of us feel the best word to call is despair. It's not in my interpretation, it's not an actual thing where he's looking out at these bones. It's a spiritual message from the prophet to those who are feeling despair, which is it's going to get better, right? That's what a prophet's supposed to do. Prophecy, therefore, God tells Ezekiel, and say to the people who are in despair, thus says God, I am going to open your graves and lift you out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel. Now, they're in the land of Israel. I can probably confuse you because I mixed in my interpretation with what the words are saying. What the words are saying is a premonition of resurrection, again, week 3 or 2.5. Okay, we will talk about resurrection 2 and why it got the idea of the resurrection of the dead. There's a reason why bodies are buried in a particular way and facing Jerusalem, because there are a series of underground tunnels that our bodies, our bones roll to. And think Jason and the Argonauts, the Messiah comes and all of our bodies pop up. So it's very interesting. We don't do the world burning down thing. We don't do the world on fire thing in Judaism. We do the opposite. The world is at peace because we made it peaceful. And then automatically, as a result of creating a perfect world, everyone comes back to life. Week 2.5 to 3. Okay, so if you have any questions that we're going to cover week 2.5 to 3, ask them. If there's any questions that you have, I promise you we will get to resurrection and reincarnation. I promise you. But those are very much there's more texts in Torah and Bible, in the Tanach, in the 39 books of the Hebrew Bible about where we go. One is called Sheol. We'll talk about, I promise you we'll talk about all that next week. But what I'm saying is it's slim pickings. In the Bible, in the 39 books of the Hebrew Bible, the canonized Bible, slim pickings for us. All of our stuff's going to come in the Talmudic period, when the rabbi, because people are obviously asking questions. There is no passage in Torah that states, and Moses died, and they went to a funeral, and they buried him, and they had Shiva, and they served bagels. Right? The laws for all of that stuff are going to be created in the Talmudic period, and then the rules for just like when you have a law in government, the rules for the law will be applied later as well, including what you should and shouldn't eat, and why we put that pitcher of water out there, and all of that kind of stuff. We're going to touch on a little bit of that tonight. Questions on everything I've said thus far? Beth Sklar. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss one?
You said that the Garden of Eden was a heaven, but
Did I not underline it? Is that what you're saying?
you underlined it, but
Oh, okay. Thank you. So let me go back to this. So the Garden of Eden is a metaphor. The tree of life is not a metaphor for death, but it is for life. In other words, it's a symbol of what life is all about. A tree, like us, goes through times when it's fruitful and times when it's barren and times when it's abundant and times when it's not so. And that's more of a symbol of life. Life has got ebbs and flows. Sometimes we feel leafy and fruitful, and sometimes not so much, right? And then sometimes the tree actually dies. But remember that whole story, the old Jewish story that we all know about the guy who plants the tree for his grandchildren and all that? The tree symbolizes life. It also symbolizes Torah. Torah is called the tree of life. So thank you for pointing that out. Was there any more in there that I underlined? Here I underline lift you out of the graves for when we get to resurrection. I want you to remember that. And here I underlined words to describe, when we look at this Jewish text, I'll get to it later, words to describe, well, I'm just going to call it heaven right now. I can also call it the world to come. Those are the two phrases that I'll use, and we're going to get to that in a second, because now we're going to go into Midrash and Talmudic stuff. Any other questions about what I said so far? Yeah. 2 circles. Back to that. Let me get back there. Yes? Thank you. There are two. I forgot to put another arrow, and I would have put a 2-way arrow here. So the stuff that I ADHD'd it. I told you about how they can communicate with us, but I didn't talk about how we communicate with them. The other thing that we're going to talk about tonight, why do we say Kaddish for a year? For our immediates, because we're helping their soul get to heaven. And we do that. A Kaddish is like a 50-50 kind of thing, right? We get to say it as mourners. It's got a meaning and a value to us. But there's also, in Jewish, our sages teach, that the souls of our loved ones for that 11 months before the yahrzeit are in limbo. That's why you have to watch Defending Your Life. They're in limbo. And I want to say the other thing about 11 months or 12 months. In the world to come, there is no time or space. It's hard to think, what does that mean? I don't know. I just know the words. I don't exactly know, Marty, if you want to say what you know about this. There's no time or space. So it's not like they're up there going day 1, day 2, day 3, right? It doesn't matter. But we are very much, we're humans. We don't understand what that's like. And so we say Kaddish for ourselves and to push their souls out of purgatory. I only call it purgatory because it's better than saying the intermediate place or whatever, Judgment City in the movie. But there is this idea that for the first 11, 12 months for the year that the soul hasn't quite. My intention when I say Kaddish is to mourn and also to help the soul return to where it's going, which is going to make more sense. So the arrow is both ways. Oh, and you can talk to the dead also. That's the third thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so the question is, if there's limbo, purgatory for 11 months or 12 months, does that mean that the souls are not, is there not a direct path, so to speak, to that part of the world to come where the souls reside? Yes, there is. There's no time and space. So it can be instantaneous. If there's no time and space, it's a construct. Rabbi David Wolpe, who I'll be sitting on a panel with this Friday at some shindig for ADL that I just got the flyer on, teaches a beautiful way of explaining this. What words can I use to describe there's no time and space? Or we do what we do for 12 months, but there's no time and space. So the punchline to your question is the souls are immediately reunited. They're immediately back together with their souls of their loved ones, those that they're tied to, including those that you didn't know that you knew, by the way, right? So, oh God, he says that imagine you're 2 years old and you go to a 2-year-old who is just forming language, just forming. Developmentally, their brain is just getting, all the things are going and their language is, if you're my kid, Ethan, I don't know what he was speaking. It was very strange language. It sounded like Cantonese, actually. But what we learned was he was born in Denver. Kids born in Denver have a propensity for ear infections. Ethan had 8 months straight of ear infections, and the argument was that he wasn't hearing. And but the speech therapist told us this. Second question was like, what's wrong? First question, what's wrong with this kid? No, first question was, did he have a lot of ear infections? A lot of kids, we don't know that. We misdiagnose, or we miss the fact that they weren't hearing properly, and that's why. So we're finally getting language. Let's say they have the ability to listen and hear. Sometimes hearing things aren't diagnosed early enough. And then to say to that 2-year-old, tell me, with your words, what it means to be a 15-year-old. What's it like to feel like you're 15, a teenager? 15's a good age. No, it's not, but it kind of is. What does it feel like? What's sophomore year of high school going to feel like? Explain that to me. That it's 100 times more complicated, 1,000,000 times more complicated for me to explain to you what heaven is. In other words, we're the 2-year-old, and it's 100 times more difficult. So I'm just using words, the world to come. And it's a long way of answering a very important question. The reunification of our soul group, of our people, and of being back with our Creator, with God, takes time. For us, not for them. There is no time and space. So it's hard to hold on to both of those ideas at the same time and still sort of get it. You know what I'm saying? Yes, Sharon. Let's do 2 more questions, then I'm going to move on to the good stuff. We're not even in the good stuff yet.
When you're born, you get your soul.
No. Before you're born, you get your soul. Your soul is at birth. In other words, it's put into your body when you come out of the canal. When you're conceived, your soul begins what I call the pre-cycle. And we'll get to that definitely next week. And a little bit tonight, because you have a guardian angel. You have that angel who spends time and teaches you all there is to learn about the universe before you're born, touches you right here where you have that little divot, and then erases your memory before you're born. So you are not a life. Even if you want to argue, you're not a life till you're 30 days old. Because they're not doing a funeral for you. That had to do with high infant mortality. Like, they didn't want you sitting Shiva every 11 months, and then maybe you'd have a kid, and then you'd have 2 more miscarriages, or stillbirths, or whatever it was. They didn't want that for us. The rabbis didn't want that, so that's why they had this 30-day buffer. But yes, you get your soul, so back to your question. You get your soul is assigned, not to your body, it is assigned before you're born. About 40 days before you're born, according to some traditions, some at conception. Then you get your lifehood, at birth. Go ahead, now the question. Then you die.
Your soul goes back to God.
Mm-hmm.
So then, what I be saying, our loved ones who have died are reunited with the others.
Right.
But
They are souls. They are souls, but they don't have bodies. So you're going to, are you asking how am I going to recognize them? There's no time. It's a fair question. It's a great question. Soul is so powerful, is so supercharged. You remember, I forget, there was another movie. Oh, it was in Defending Your Life. That's why you have to see it. The guys who are the judges in Judgment City, Rip Thorne, says, you're a 2%er. You only use 3% of your brain. I use 55% of my brain. Like, you couldn't possibly understand what I'm writing on this paper or whatever. The idea is that, no, your soulmate has nothing to do with the physical aspects of someone. It is a deep connection. Yes, laws of attraction, all of that stuff, very much important. But you know your soulmate without being able to describe it, or even being able to, in other words, being able to describe what it looks like. You just know your Bashar, your soulmate. Your soulmate doesn't have to be someone you're married to. Okay, so I have lots of people in my life. I don't see them for 10 years, and we pick up where we left off. I'm going to the Bay Area in the beginning of August to do a bar mitzvah for my friend Lori Steiner's kid. Lori I've known since I'm 13. Why am I schlepping to California? Because it's Lori's kid. Lori's in my soul group, right? I don't see her for 3, 4, 5 years, and there's comfort the second I'm in her presence and discrimination. Doesn't matter what someone looks like or acts, whatever. Actions, responsibility, deeds, those are the things that are judged ultimately, not how someone looks. That's a human construct. Okay, we have exactly 12 minutes. 8 minutes, no, 12 minutes. You want me to keep going? Because I want to get through this. Yes. Let's do 2 questions, and then I'll keep going. Because I'm not going to get through everything tonight, which is fine. Yeah. No, back into yours. It doesn't make any sense. That's what we're going to talk about next week. Because I have to explain how you can hold 2 ideas that are in conflict at the same time. Yeah. The rabbis are just using language, human language. They're trying to describe things and explain things to us. And that one of those ideas is that you are resurrected as you. And that doesn't make sense if the body's on loan and it, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Yes? Right. Sure. Right. Right. So are you saying, is the question more like a selfless act should be more important than do I believe in the resurrection of the dead? I agree with you. Of course. By the way, so the question is, if I do a life of selfless acts, shouldn't that be what counts? If I do a life that's totally selfish and I do no acts that benefit anyone other than myself, shouldn't that be a reason not to go? Right? Totally agree with you. So when we talk about resurrection, I'll add to it, if I'm an observant, halachic, really hardcore Jew, the logic has nothing to do with you're in or you're out. The logic has to do with there are certain things that if you don't have faith or belief or at least some connection to, the argument from the rabbis is then why do this whole thing? Like, why do mitzvot? That's the only thing that they're bringing up that I was presenting, but that doesn't mean I agree with it. In fact, selfless acts, the most selfless act that you can do, we're going to get to now, is burying the dead. The most selfless thing you can do, the most selfless mitzvah, is to bury the dead. Why? Because they cannot give it back. They cannot return the favor. They cannot do the thing back for you. Because they're dead. Right? So that, according to the rabbis, is a very selfless act. Sharon, and then I want to move on.
When you were talking about the souls,
Yeah.
if you have a soul at conception, what happens with abortion?
I'm not going to get into abortion tonight. Us having an idea of a soul at conception does not mean that you're alive. Right? If I'm dead, and I still have a soul that is in this woo-hoo. So I can't get into it tonight because it would be a very long conversation. It's a great question. And I was wondering if someone would ask, but good job. All right. Before you die, nowadays, maybe not so much 100 years ago, there's something called actively dying. 100 years ago, you would die. I'm sure there were cancers and there were things that were lengthy periods of time that someone was dying. In the Torah, Jacob doesn't just wake up one day and die that day. We have a whole story about how his kids are gathered at his bedside. We have a whole image of Jacob surrounded by all of his kids, and they're interacting, and they know he's about to die. So, yes, dying is a process, and sometimes dying is sudden. But what the sages are going to teach us is that in that time when the process of dying is really happening, someone is actively dying, they actually can make a final confessional. And the reason why I show this to you is because there are a lot of Jews who think we don't do final confessionals. Yes, we do. Marty and I do them all the time. Okay? We do them on behalf of the person because the person typically, in our day and age, is on a ventilator or on a lot of medication, sedation, morphine, whatever it is, when we visit them at a hospice or a hospital. And so they can't physically say the prayer for themselves. But we still say this for them because we believe the soul is hovering the body. Hovering meaning it's not even started its transition yet. It's still, and it couldn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt. So what do we say? This long thing, we have a different version that we use. This is from the Rabbinic Assemblies, Rabbi Manuel. God and God of my fathers, accept my prayer. Do not ignore my supplication. Forgive me for all the sins which I have committed in my lifetime. I am abashed and ashamed, the wicked deeds, so on and so forth. It's very, very, very similar to the Vidui in the Yom Kippur liturgy. Yom Kippur is a rehearsal for death. And this is the actual prayer. It's a little bit more detailed. It's a little bit fuller than what we say. But when we say the prayer, oh, God, what's it called? God and God, anyway, we have transgressed, we have sinned, we have gone astray, that one. Not Asham, it's right before Asham. Anyway, and it's, by the way, we stand up for it. Some congregations, they even open the ark for it. It's kind of a big deal. Please accept my pain and suffering as atonement. Because it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't, these days, typically feel painful. Right? If it's sudden, it's sudden. There's definitely pain involved. But people who have a progression or an active dying process will typically be medicated to numb the pain. But anyway, please accept my pain and suffering. Forgive my wrongdoing, for against you alone I have sinned. May it be your will, God, for my mothers and fathers, that I sin no more. With your great mercy, cleanse my sins. Going to heaven with a cleansed soul, if you can accomplish that, you're in really, really good shape according to the sages. That's why we say the Shema before we go to bed. By the way, the Shema is the last part of the Vidui. So what we do is we acknowledge God's oneness, the oneness of God, or as we call the watchword of our faith, before we go to sleep, because the rabbis believed that a certain percentage of your body dies for a split second. Because remember, you wake up in the morning and say, thank you, God, for returning my soul. God had to take your soul out in order to return it. It happens in a split second. So just in case I'm covering my tuchas, I say the Shema. And I know that sounds flippant, but the rabbis were very pragmatic. Oh, if I'm going to say, Shehecha Zarta Bi Nishmati in the morning, thank you, God, for returning my soul to my body, then I have to believe that God took my soul out of my body for a split second. I better say the Shema before I go to sleep. And that's why that's a mini confessional, if you will. So as long as you're saying Shema Yisrael and Echad before you go to bed, you can have a cleansed soul in the very, 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 very not going to happen that your soul does not get returned to you. Okay, and then it's got all this other stuff here that you can look at later. Now I'm rushing. Okay, here's what we're going to do next week. And then I'll answer questions with the last 5 minutes. Next week, we're going to talk about what happens when someone dies in a traditional sense. And we're going to talk about the different stages and phases of the after someone dies period. And we're going to talk about what happens at the funeral. We're going to talk about the Jewish mourning, as you can see, Shiva, Shloshim, 11 months, Yartzeit. And then we're going to go into, after we go through that, do Jews believe in hell? Do Jews believe in resurrection? Do Jews believe in reincarnation? Yes, yes, and yes. Okay? Questions? Let's do 2 or 3 questions. Yes, Rabbi.
No question.
I'm going to give you the microphone because you know.
A true midrash related to what we talked about. Okay, I got it. If when we talked earlier about going to a soothsayer or a medium or something like that, before I started dating this lovely lady next to me, I had a medium who's a friend of mine come to the house to give me a reading. I wanted to make sure that Roberta was okay and everything was all right. She came with her tarot cards and she put them out, and her reading was that Roberta had a hard time when she first crossed over, but everything is fine now. About 3 weeks later in this midrash, Tzipporah calls me. Tzipporah, my granddaughter, calls me and says, Zadie, I had such terrible dreams just last night. Bubby came to me, and she was right there. And Bubby told me she had a hard time crossing over into heaven. The same thing that I was told by the medium. But she added, the reason why, there was a lot of paperwork, and she was confused. It might have been trying to get through the cherubim. You know, you had to fill out a form in order to get through. At any rate, but she's fine now, and everything is good. Okay, right. All right, and telling them what they need to do. So that's, when you talk about those things, it was just too freaky.
As I like to say, why did it surprise you? They happen all the time. And why do they happen all the time? They happen to people who are tied into this because they do prayer, repentance, and charity on a regular basis. It is much, much easier. I don't say this to be judgmental. Much easier to access these parts of your spiritual life if you are doing them, right? It would be like if I were to go to the gym tomorrow and try to bench press 400 pounds, I'd kill myself, and then I'd never exercise again. Unfortunately for people, one bad experience in a synagogue and whatever will, right? I'm oversimplifying. My point is that when you have access like Zipporah does, and an old soul to boot, you're going to have an easier time, easy is relative, of course, laughing about it even, if you are tied into these things. We don't fear death in Judaism. We just don't want to do it. Right? We just don't want to go with it. We don't want, my grandmother used to say that all the time. I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to die. And you get that, right? Like that was like this idea. And that also, when you were talking about this idea that Roberta's soul was having a hard time with the transition, that's why the rabbis, I believe, gave us these 30 days, a year, because when their soul feels that we're saying Kaddish for them, it helps with that transition. It takes, there's a great midrash of a Hasidic midrash that, and when we're born, that angel of, the angel who's taking care of us, our guardian angel, whatever you want to call it, is up in heaven crying and sad because we're being born, we're going to earth and we're leaving them. And everyone down here is laughing and dancing and singing, except for, of course, the mom who's going through labor. But after the part where the labor's over, right, everyone's happy and joyous. And when we die, everyone down here is sad and crying, and everyone up there is happy and joyous. But that doesn't mean that our soul doesn't go through that transition very, very profoundly. And that's why Kaddish is said. And if it's said with that intention of I'm saying it for myself, but I'm also saying it for the soul of the person that I love, I think it takes on a whole new meaning for us. And that's why we do classes like this, so that we can share that stuff. Okay, Laura, you get the last word tonight. Oh, and then Joe, you'll get one question.
Okay. When I did hypnotherapy, I did clinical hypnotherapy, and I did past life regressions in Baltimore. And the thing that you saw, the two circles and then the overlapping there, not all clients, but some clients, I was able to take them to their death, through their death, and then into the interlife. And that's what that marquee space is the interlife in reincarnation, in between incarnations. And the best work took place then because they were in the purest form. They were no longer into the ego of who their life was and who they were before. And the best work took place because they were so pure, they had such clarity. And now not everybody could do that. Not everybody would get to that place. But when I had people that did, it was magical. It was absolutely magical.
Yeah, those are two very good intros to next week, or to what we're going to talk about. And the third week, we're going to talk a lot about that stuff. But next week, we're going to get through that whole, what is all these steps and stages for a funeral? Why are we making such a big fuss? Because that transition is sacred. And it's painful, and it's a whole life lesson built into one, maybe even 7-day, 30-day period that is horrible and awful, but also there's another side to it, and that's the hope part of the whole system is getting into that part where you understand Yitkadal v'Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, that God is still great and majestic, and the world is still wonderful, and the world, P.S., still goes on, because the soul is also going on. It's not ended, but in our human capacity of love and being married to someone for a gazillion years and so on and so forth, it's very, very, very hard to get from one stage to the other. But that's why there are stages. It's not an immediate. Okay, Joe, you had a question.
Are there good and bad souls? And the reason I say that, I remember my buddy used the term
Is there a bad soul and a good soul? Great question. In week 3, and we did this at the class on Baba Mises, there are souls that are broken. In other words, there are souls in any system, even in God's system, right? Because God is all about perfection and beauty and Buddha. There are some that slip through the cracks. And we'll talk about where they go. We're going to talk about hell next week a little bit as an intro. There are certain criteria for a soul to be irreparably broken. Okay, and everyone wants to go to Hitler. We're not talking about Hitler. Okay, we're talking about the characteristics. And it's going to blow your mind because it's not who you think, right? The person I don't like or my enemy. There are certain aspects of someone's character that if they are broken permanently, for example, someone who is disassociative, in other words, they cannot have a relationship, we then have to look at where that came from. Because if you're a kid and you grow up in a house with parents who are addicted to drugs, your brain is automatically, I'm not a therapist or a scientist, but it's going to create walls which are impenetrable. But some people do get to the other side of that in their lives, and it's a flipping miracle that they do. But when you become so broken that you cannot, and then you turn into basically, it's not the disassociating, it's turning, when that turns into psychopathic, murderer kind of behavior, where now you have no sense of right and wrong anymore, then there's unfortunately a consequence to that. But it has to be something that is all built into the system of choosing, free will, so on and so forth, versus someone who is born into a system whereby it's nearly impossible for them not to have that kind of soul because of what they're born into. And so we tend to go, do we go compassionate? Do we go whatever? And what does God do ultimately? Because God, last thing, and then Sharon, I'll answer your question just one-on-one. Last thing, God knows the secrets. God knows the secrets, which means God knows whether your soul is bad or good. And we do leave that up to God because we have no choice in those situations where it may be one way or the other. Okay, so that's all next week, and we only went 7 minutes late. Yay. See you next week.